At 6:40 p.m. Eastern Time on Saturday, February 28, 2026, at 2:10 a.m. in Iran, in the dark, in complete silence over Iranian airspace, a B-2 Spirit stealth bomber, invisible to radar, invisible to human eyes, invisible to every surface-to-air missile battery Iran had deployed around its most protected facility, approached a mountain in the K province. That mountain had a name, Fordow, and inside it drilled 80 to 100 meters into solid rock and reinforced concrete protected by layers of earth that had taken Iranian engineers 19 years to dig and harden was the most secretive nuclear enrichment facility on the planet. A facility that Western intelligence had been studying for 15 straight years. A facility that Israeli jets could not reach. A facility that conventional bombs could not touch. A facility that Iran had built for one reason and one reason only: to be indestructible. The B-2 opened its Bombay, and America showed Iran what indestructible actually looks like. What happened in the next 25 minutes changed the entire nuclear order of the world. And the full inside story, the deception, the 37-hour flight, the analyst who spent 15 years studying one ventilation shaft, the trucks that arrived 3 days early, and the classified report that nobody wants you to read, is what I'm going to give you right now. If you have been following this entire Iran crisis and you want the complete picture of the night that started everything, the night the bombs actually fell, subscribe right now. This is the most detailed account of Operation Midnight Hammer that exists outside a classified briefing room. Stay with me. Every minute of this matters. Let me start with the man nobody talked about enough. He was an analyst at the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, DTRA, a small, largely unknown agency headquartered at Fort Belvoir, Virginia, about a 20-minute drive from the Pentagon, whose entire mission is one-sentence: counter-weapons of mass destruction. This analyst was shown photographs of Fordow in 2009, 3 years after Iran began secretly building it, secretly. The United States did not know Fordow existed until 2009, when US and British intelligence revealed the site after Iran quietly began construction inside a Revolutionary Guard base near KM. This analyst looked at those first photographs in 2009 and he did not leave. For 15 years, he studied one target. 15 years. He watched the Iranians dig. He watched the construction. He analyzed the weather patterns above the mountain. He cataloged the discarded materials. He identified the geology, the specific rock composition, the density, the fracture lines. He studied the ventilation shafts. He examined the exhaust shafts. He mapped the electrical systems, the environmental control infrastructure, every nook, every piece of equipment going in, every piece coming out. He was, in the words of General Dan Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, a man who lived and breathed a single target. One man, one target, 15 years. Because he understood something that every other analyst eventually concluded too. Fordow was not just a nuclear facility. Fordow was the answer to a question Iran had been asking since 1981. The question was, how do you build something that no one can destroy? And the answer was, you build it inside a mountain. 260 feet of rock and reinforced concrete overhead. The entire complex carved into the earth like a cathedral buried beneath a cemetery. Multiple cascade halls, multiple ventilation systems, redundant power supplies, multiple tunnel entrances. Some of them intelligence would later confirm. Decoys built to absorb a bomb strike while the real entrance tunnels remained intact. The analyst, who had been studying this for 15 years, knew all of it. He knew which entrances were real. He knew what shafts led to the centrifuge halls. He knew what the ventilation exhaust signatures meant. And he knew that if you wanted to reach the centrifuges, the thousands of machines spinning at supersonic speed 260 feet below the surface, you could not bomb the mountain. You had to send the bomb into the mountain. Now, let me show you the weapon, because you cannot understand what happened on the night of June 21st without understanding the only tool that could make it happen, the GBU-57 Massive Ordnance Penetrator, 30,000 pounds. That is the weight of 3 adult African elephants, a single bomb. It is the largest conventional bomb in the American military's inventory, in any military's inventory in the history of warfare. It was designed for exactly one purpose: to destroy underground facilities that no other weapon in the world can reach. The bomb penetrates the earth at supersonic speed. The dense body made of high-strength steel punches through the surface and drives itself into the ground before the warhead detonates. According to the manufacturer's specifications, it can penetrate 61 m of reinforced concrete or 40 m of moderately hard rock. Ford's centrifuge hulls are 80 to 100 m underground. This is a number that every defense analyst and every Iranian military planner had been working with for years. The MOP can reach 61 m. Fordow is 80 to 100 m down. That gap, 20 to 40 m between what the bomb can reach and where the centrifuges are, is why Iran believed Fordow was indestructible. And that gap is also what the 15-year analyst had been solving for, because the MOP does not need to reach the centrifuge hull directly. It needs to reach the ventilation shaft. Here's what General Kane described in his post-mission briefing at the Pentagon. And I want you to understand this sequence with the precision it deserves. The first B-2 over Ford dropped the first GBU-57. That bomb's purpose was not to destroy a centrifuge. Its purpose was to remove the defensive concrete cap from the primary ventilation shaft. The concrete cap, the sealed protective cover over the shaft opening, the last physical barrier between the surface and the underground complex. The first bomb, 30,000 pounds, detonating at exactly the right coordinates, forcibly removed that cap and exposed the shaft. Then bombs 2, 3, 4, and 5 followed in sequence. Each one tasked, in Kane's exact words, to enter the main shaft, move down into the complex at greater than 1,000 feet per second, and explode in the mission space greater than 1,000 foot pers, traveling down a ventilation shaft at supersonic speed, detonating inside the mountain, not on top of it, not outside it, inside it. When a 30,000 pounds bomb detonates inside an underground space, the shock wave does not dissipate outward into open air as it would on a surface explosion. It reflects. It bounces off the rock walls. It multiplies. The centrifuge machines, which spin uranium hexafluoride gas at speeds above the speed of sound to separate isotopes, are instruments of extraordinary mechanical precision. They require vibration environments measured in fractions of millimeters of displacement. A reflected underground shock wave from a 30,000 pounds bomb does not produce fractions of millimeters of displacement. Produces meters. The machines did not need to be directly hit. They needed to be near something that was hit. 5 bombs entered one shaft at Fordow that night. Now, let me take you to Missouri, because before any of that happened, before the first bomb fell, before the first centrifuge shattered, 7 men and women climbed into the cockpits of B-2 Spirit stealth bombers at Whiteman Air Force Base. It was 6:40 p.m. Eastern on June 21st in the United States. That means it was 3:40 a.m. the following morning in Tran. The planes took off east, not alone, but in a formation that was not visible to anyone outside a classified operations room. Their families were informed of the mission on the evening of June 21st. The same evening the world found out the United States had bombed Iran. That is not a logistical quirk. That is an operational security decision that tells you how tightly held this mission was. The 7 B-2 crews did not get to tell their spouses before takeoff. They got on the planes. They flew east. At the same time, a second group of B-2s took off from Weitman and flew west toward Guam. This is the deception operation that barely made it into any coverage. The United States flew B-2 bombers west toward the Pacific, while the strike package flew east toward Iran. Any Iranian intelligence asset, any Russian satellite, any regional radar tracking signature of B-2 departures from white men at that hour would have seen activity heading toward Guam, not activity heading toward the Middle East. The decoy flight was designed to draw the gaze west, while the real mission moved east through the Atlantic, across the Mediterranean, over the Middle East. 18 hours of flight time, 3 aerial refueling contacts. Each refueling conducted in darkness, in radio silence, at high altitude from a tanker aircraft whose presence in the sky was itself classified. The B-2 crews did not communicate with anyone for most of that flight. No conversation, no status updates, no weather reports unless operationally necessary. Just 7 stealth aircraft moving through international airspace in the dark until they crossed into Iranian airspace and nothing happened. Iran's air defense radars did not light up. Iran's surface-to-air missiles did not achieve a lock. Iran's fighter jets did not scramble because Iran's air defenses had been systematically dismantled by Israeli strikes over the 10 days preceding this mission. Israel had been in Iran's skies since June 13th, night after night, striking missile systems, radar installations, air defense batteries. By June 21st, Iran's integrated air defense network and built over decades with Russian assistance. The same network that was supposed to make for impenetrable was blinded. And General Kane said it directly. He said, "Iran's fighters did not fly. It appears Iran's surface-to-air missile systems did not see us. Throughout the mission, we retained the element of surprise inside Iranian airspace with bombers that had been in the air for 18 straight hours." Now, let me show you the detail that everyone missed, because 3 days before the bombs fell on June 19, 2025, something happened at Fordow that satellite imagery captured in real time. Planet Labs PBC, the commercial satellite company whose imagery has driven this entire crisis's intelligence picture, photographed 16 cargo trucks near Fordow's entrance tunnel. 16 trucks loading 3 days before the American bombs arrived. A senior Iranian official named Mohammadi stated publicly on June 22, the day of the strikes, that Ford had been evacuated days prior. Iranian sources claimed that approximately 400 kilograms of enriched uranium had been removed from the facility before the attack. 400 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% purity on trucks moving to an unknown location 3 days before the strike. Now, here is what this means. And here is what every official in Washington spent the weeks after the strike fighting over, because the Defense Intelligence Agency, the Pentagon's own intelligence arm, delivered a preliminary assessment 3 days after the strikes. That assessment was leaked to CNN. It said the strike set back Iran's nuclear program by 3 to 6 months. Not years, not permanently, 3 to 6 months. Because the core-enriched uranium stockpile had largely been moved before the bombs arrived. Because the centrifuge hulls, while severely damaged, had their entrances sealed rather than collapsed entirely. Because the lower structures of Fordow and Isfahan showed signs of being operationally intact despite caved-in tunnel entrances, the White House called the DIA report flat-out wrong. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth called it media trying to cheer against the president. Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard said new intelligence confirms the facilities have been destroyed. And Trump went on Truth Social and called it fake news. He threatened that CNN and New York Times reporters would be fired for fabricating the story. This is the battle that broke out within 72 hours of the most complex and secretive military operation in American history. 2 versions of the same night. Same bombs, same craters, same satellite imagery, different conclusions about what happened 260 foot underground. Here is why both sides of that argument are partially right, and why this is the most important unresolved question about Operation Midnight Hammer. Months later, still unanswered. The surface evidence is unambiguous. Maxar Technologies' satellite imagery taken the morning after the strikes shows 6 separate impact craters at Fordow running in 2 groups along a ridge directly above the underground complex. The tunnel entrances are blocked with debris and collapsed earth. A layer of gray-blue ash visible across a wide area surrounding the site. That is not a failed strike. That is devastating surface damage. But the centrifuges are not on the surface. The centrifuges are 80 meters down. And as retired U.S. Navy Captain Carlo Schuster, a 25-year veteran with expertise in battle damage assessment, explained directly, deep penetration weapons typically inflict their destruction far below the surface. The blast occurs more than 100 foot underground. The debris falls back into the shaft. The surface crater looks comparatively small and shallow. Inexperienced or more agenda-driven imagery, analysts examining those craters may convince themselves that very little damage was inflicted. Because the damage is invisible, it is 260 feet below what any satellite can see. And the IAEA director, Rafael Gross, said in an emergency board meeting that given the explosive payload utilized and the extremely vibration-sensitive nature of centrifuges, very significant damage is expected to have occurred. Expected, not confirmed. Expected. Because no one, not the IAEA, not the Pentagon, not the DIA, has been inside Fordow since the night of June 21st. Iran expelled IAEA inspectors following the strikes, and the most important nuclear intelligence question in the world is currently buried under a mountain in K province that nobody is allowed to enter. Now let me give you the full picture of what happened across all 3 sites that night, because Fordow was the centerpiece. The hardest, the deepest, the most significant. But it was not the only target. Natanz, Iran's largest nuclear enrichment center. 6 above-ground buildings, 3 underground structures housing centrifuge cascades. The site that had already been struck by Israel on June 13th, knocking out electrical infrastructure and damaging above-ground facilities. On the night of June 21st, a single B-2 dropped 2 GBU-57 bunker buster bombs on Natanz. 2 craters visible the following morning in Maxar imagery, one approximately 5.5 m in diameter, one approximately 3.2 m, both positioned directly above underground portions of the complex. Then a USS submarine, the USS Georgia, which had been positioned in the region since September 2024, fired 30 Tomahawk land attack missiles at both Natanz and Isfahan. Tomahawks at supersonic cruise speed, terrain following guidance, precision terminal targeting, each one programmed to a specific address inside the facility perimeters. Isfahan, Iran's largest nuclear research complex, the conversion facility where natural uranium is transformed into uranium hexafluoride gas, the feedstock that feeds into centrifuges at Natanz and Fordow. The site that the IAEA's own confidential report confirmed this February was storing Iran's 440 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium underground. The Tomahawks from the Georgia struck Isfahan after the B-2S hit Fordow and Natanz. The full sequence for Fordow struck at 2:10 a.m. local time. Natanz simultaneously Tomahawks arriving at Isfahan lasted fewer than 30 minutes, less than half an hour to execute the most consequential conventional military strike in American history. And then the B-2S turned around and flew home for another 19 hours. The entire Whiteman to Iran to Whiteman round trip, 37 hours of continuous flight, 3 aerial refueling contacts on the way east, 3 on the way home, pilots in the air for a day and a half without landing. There is no other military on Earth that could have done this. Not technically, not logistically, not operationally. General Kane said it, Trump said it. Even the harshest critics of the strike's effectiveness acknowledged the operational execution was flawless. Now, here is the piece that every mainstream outlet covered for one news cycle and then forgot. And it is the piece that explains everything that has happened in the 8 months since. The 400 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium that left Fordow on those 16 trucks 3 days before the strike. Where did it go? Nobody in the West knows. Not definitively. American officials speaking to the Council on Foreign Relations said they were unsure what became of the stockpile. They said the question of whether the strike destroyed the Iranian nuclear program or merely forced it into smaller, more secretive pockets of Iran's web of 30-plus nuclear sites remains unanswered. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said he had, in his words, interesting intel on its whereabouts. He did not elaborate. The IAEA cannot look for it because its inspectors were expelled. And this is the problem that has driven every development in this crisis from June 22, 2025 until today. Trump said obliterated. The DIA said 3 to 6 month setback. Pegst said devastating. Ka said extremely severe damage. Iran said superficial. Vance said much further from a nuclear program. And somewhere inside Iran, on trucks, in tunnels, in an underground storage facility at a location no Western satellite has identified,
confirmed,
400 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% purity is sitting waiting for the centrifuges to be rebuilt or for the final processing step that takes it to 90%. To weapons grade, this is the question that brought the USS Gerald R. Ford and the USS Abraham Lincoln to the Persian Gulf. This is the question that drove 3 rounds of Geneva talks. This is the question that kept Admiral Cooper out of the Oval Office for 2 months and then suddenly required him there. This is the question that the ventilation shaft sequence, the 37-hour flight, the 14 bunker buster bombs, the 30 Tomahawks, and 125 aircraft were all trying to answer on the night of June 21st. And they did not fully answer it. Now, let me show you the numbers that tell the story the headlines don't. 125 aircraft total, 7 B-2 Spirit stealth bombers delivering the primary payload, multiple F-35 and F-22 fifth-generation fighters entering Iranian airspace ahead of the B-2S, specifically to draw any surface-to-air missile fire, confirming that defenses were blind before the main strike package arrived. Dozens of KC-135 and KC-46 tanker aircraft maintaining the aerial refueling chain across the Atlantic and Mediterranean. Intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance aircraft RC-135s, U-2S Global Hawks tracking every movement in Iranian airspace, and 1 guided missile submarine below the surface. 14 GBU 57 massive ordnance penetrators, their first ever operational use in combat. A weapon that took 15 years of development that the United States owns exclusively that no other country on Earth possesses. That was designed specifically for the day that a deeply buried nuclear facility needed to be reached by a bomb. That day was June 21, 2025. 30 Tomahawk cruise missiles from the USS Georgia. More than 75 precision-guided weapons in total, all delivered in 25 minutes inside an adversary's airspace without a single U.S. aircraft being fired upon. Without a single Iranian air defense radar achieving a targeting solution without a single American casualty. The element of surprise was total. The execution was flawless. And whether the centrifuges are destroyed or whether they are still spinning in a tunnel somewhere east of Isfahan, the operation itself stands as the most operationally complex American military action since the raid that killed Osama bin Laden. And it was significantly larger in scale. Here's what Iran did in the immediate aftermath. And here's what those actions tell you about whether Fordow was truly obliterated. The Iranian reaction was not the reaction of a country whose nuclear program had been destroyed. The Atomic Energy Organization of Iran published a statement calling the strikes a barbaric act. It said radiation surveys showed no signs of contamination near the sites, which is actually significant because if Ford's underground centrifuge halls had been completely collapsed and the radioactive material inside them scattered, there would have been detectable radiation at the surface. No surface radiation means the walls held. The AOI said it planned to continue its nuclear program, and the AEOI said it would seek justice in international court. A lawmaker from Qom, the city nearest Fordow, said the damage was, quote, quite superficial. A man who lives in the same province as a facility that was just struck by 12 bunker buster bombs, calling it superficial. Now, those Iranian statements need to be taken with a filter. Iran has a documented history of minimizing the impact of strikes on its nuclear program. After Israel struck Iran's facilities on June 13th, the strikes that kicked off the entire Iran-Israel war, Iranian officials also described the damage as minimal. The satellite imagery told a different story. David Albright, the president of the Institute for Science and International Security, told CNN directly, initial Iranian downplaying should be dismissed. Iran soft pedals impact only for satellite imagery to tell a very different story. He said, overall, Israel's and U.S. attacks have effectively destroyed Iran's centrifuge enrichment program. It will be a long time before Iran comes anywhere near the capability it had before the attack. A long time, not 3 to 6 months as the DIA preliminary report suggested. A long time, the divergence between those two assessments, DIA months versus Albright. Long time is the analytical battle that has defined every policy decision since June 22nd. And it has not been resolved, because the mountain is still closed. Here is the most revealing piece of intelligence about what actually happened at Fordow that night. General Kane described at his Pentagon briefing exactly how the 5 bombs entered the primary ventilation shaft. 5 bombs into one shaft. If the first bomb simply opened the concrete cap and the subsequent 4 bombs traveled down the shaft into the centrifuge complex below, that sequence implies the bombs got inside, not outside, not above, inside. And a munitions expert N.R. Jensen-Jones, speaking to CNN the day after the strike, confirmed that the MOP was designed to penetrate 61 m of Earth. Fordow's halls are 80 to 100 meters below the surface, but the ventilation shafts are not 80 meters of solid rock. They are tunnels, engineered openings in the mountain. If you remove the cap, as the first bomb did, and send 4 30,000-pound bombs traveling at 1,000 feet per second down an existing tunnel, you are not trying to penetrate 80 m of rock. You're sending a bomb down an air shaft into the space where the centrifuge is live. This is what the 15-year analyst figured out. Not how to punch through the mountain, how to thread a bomb through the mountain's own architecture, and the shock wave from 4 sequential 30,000-pound detonations inside an enclosed underground space with walls of rock instead of open air to reflect the blast back onto the centrifuge machines. That is not 3 to 6 months of damage. That is, in the words of former ODNI National Intelligence Manager for Iran, Norman Rule, catastrophic. He used that word twice. Catastrophic. Here's where the story ends and the next chapter begins. Because Operation Midnight Hammer was not the end of Iran's nuclear ambition. It was the opening of a new and more dangerous phase of it. Iran expelled the IAEA inspectors. Iran began rebuilding immediately. New construction documented at sites adjacent to Natanz within months. New tunnels at Pickaxe Mountain south of Natanz, where thermal signatures suggested centrifuge activity in February 2026. New underground construction adjacent to Isfahan, the facility whose underground storage location, the IAEA, confirmed this week, contains 440 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium, the same uranium that may have left Fordow on 16 trucks before the bombs arrived. Trump said obliterated. Iran said, "We continue." Both statements are simultaneously true. The buildings are gone. The program is not. And that is the answer that brought 125 aircraft to the skies over Iran on the night of June 21, 2025. And that is driving 2 carrier strike groups, 50,000 troops, 6 B-2 bombers, and every other asset currently in the Persian Gulf region right now. Because the question that Midnight Hammer was supposed to answer permanently, does Iran have the material and the capability to build a nuclear weapon, is still unanswered, buried under a mountain on trucks heading somewhere east of Isfahan in a tunnel network expanding by the week. That is why the Ford is in the Persian Gulf. That is why the Lincoln is 150 miles off Oman. That is why 15 years of one analyst's work was not enough. And that is why what happens in the coming days will determine whether Midnight Hammer was the end of Iran's nuclear program, or simply the beginning of its most dangerous phase. If this gave you the complete inside account of Operation Midnight Hammer that no single source put together in one place hit like right now, this is the foundation for understanding everything that comes after. Share it. Subscribe if you're not already here, because the next chapter of this story, the one Midnight Hammer made inevitable, is happening right now. Drop your read in the comments. Was Operation Midnight Hammer the decisive blow Trump called it? Or did the 16 trucks that arrived at Fordow 3 days early change everything? I read every single one. 125 aircraft, 14 bombs, 1 mountain, 5 bombs down 1 shaft, and 400 kilograms of uranium on trucks somewhere in Iran. Still,